Dennis O'Rourke.
Mr Speaker, here we are again, taking another step as a result of the quagmire of state asset sales. The sale of Mighty River Power Limited was an act of economic sabotage that will forever taint this government. Beg your pardon?
No, I'm signalling to someone behind you. I apologise for the distraction.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'll say again. The sale of Mighty River Power Limited was an act of economic sabotage that will forever taint this government and forever damage this country's economic and social well-being. Everyone except ministers in this government knows that state asset sales are economic and financial madness. On any rational basis, it's simply balmy. And so few people support this balmy policy that, with or without approving referendum, National is in fact just trashing our democracy. It is idle nonsense to claim a mandate when it is abundantly obvious that this is the government's most hated policy, and this includes most of those who voted National at the last election. They did so for other reasons, which are inexplicable to me, but it is nevertheless true that they elected a National government knowing that National would sell strategic assets, and so they did so on a warts and all basis. In fact, there are so many warts that the government's so-called mandate is utterly unidentifiable. So let's hear no more talk of the government's claim that it now has any mandate at all. It never really had one from the beginning. The fundamental objection is that the policy is now seen to be what it really is, a swindle perpetrated on the public of New Zealand, because what we really own is being sold back to us, but not all of us, only some of us. So we go from assets owned by all of us to assets owned only by a few, those who can afford to buy the shares. The result is to further widen the already growing chasm between people with the wealth and incomes for a good living and those who struggle to earn a living, own a home and bring up and educate their children while saving for their retirement. Mr Speaker, I am an egalitarianist and abhor that kind of swindle. A few may think they are winners, and there may be a few pieces of silver for some, but as a nation we are collectively impoverished by these sales. We will save the interest on some of our borrowing in the short term, but we all lose the handsome dividend stream these companies provide, as well as their capital growth for the whole of our future. And to make matters worse and exacerbate the financial stupidity of these sales, we are paying an army of consultants and merchant bankers a fortune to do it for us. So it's a kind of financial sadism that we now see being imposed upon us. The total bill for the float of Mighty River Power is a cool $41 million, a colossal waste of taxpayers' money. This money would be better used elsewhere, even while this slash-and-burn government moves more and more to reduce the number and quality of public services under the guise of efficiency. And the Meridian float is expected to cost at least another $41 million. So that is a colossal $82 million for absolutely nothing. That money would be better spent on schools, hospitals and the things that really matter. As Brian Gaynor said in this Tuesday's Herald, the initial public offices were a gravy train for the investment banks. Mr Speaker, even Dick Turpin and the highway robbers of old would not have been that brazen. In fact, Dick would have been proud of the sheer scale and audacity of these robberies, effectively robbing the poor and middle New Zealand to the advantage of the rich. While only 49% of these companies are being sold for now, these sales are surely only the first step of old-fashioned true full privatisation in due course. And this is despite the old lessons of the past privatisations not being learnt. State asset sales of this kind have always proved to be an unmitigated disaster, with some companies required to be bought back. And New Zealanders will pay a heavy price for this mad policy for generations to come, because New Zealand's assets are being stripped and plundered by an economically illiterate government, so bereft of ideas for managing our economy prudently and effectively and without undue austerity measures, that 2013 will go down as a black year in the history of the New Zealand economy, with the sale of Mighty River Power and soon Meridian Energy. In the face of overwhelming economic and financial logic, the key government has ploughed on with this absurd, damaging project regardless of the cost to the country, because National and its cronies insist on following the tried and failed ideology of the so-called market, trumping all other considerations. And the so-called safeguards over the extent of foreign ownership are worth as much as Mr Key's other bogus and empty pronouncements. He is justly regarded as our least trusted politician. He is now the arch swindler. He will go down in history as the Prime Minister who sold out, who did dodgy deals, and who ultimately will cut and run, leaving us all to pick up the pieces. New Zealander First is committed to bringing back Mighty River Power to where it belongs, to the ownership of the people of New Zealand, all of them. We are committed to buying back state assets over time and from the first opportunity. New Zealand First will restore the state-owned electricity generators now being sold back into public ownership and put them back under a single generating entity. We believe in a mixed economy, one in which the private sector and the public sector work together to provide a prosperous and stable society, and which is fair to the whole population rather than only for the benefit of some. So, Mr Speaker, while we do not oppose the principle of transparency of information for companies such as this, New Zealand First will vote against the motion only as a means of further expressing our implacable opposition to asset sales generally.
Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Labor Party, as my colleague the Honourable Clayton Cosgrove has already indicated, supports this notice of motion because it is one of the few ways in which we're going to have at least a modicum of transparency as to what's happening at Mighty River Power now that half of it is being privatised. Mr Speaker, we've already had this